All right, we are live on YouTube. Welcome to this Ask Me Anything session here. We have Kurt Andersen from Blameless. Kurt, why don't you kick us off here? Share a bit about who you are. I know you've already had a session on the other day. You were on, I think, the first day on Monday. So with your site reliability principles for everyone session, which was a good session. But let people know who you are, and we'll talk a little bit about Blameless because we really appreciate them being a platinum sponsor as well.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, for the opportunity. As you say, I'm Kurt Andersen. I work as a SRE architect at Blameless. Previously with LinkedIn, I was a site reliability engineer there. And Blameless is, our mission is to improve the reliability of software and the resilience of teams. We haven't quite figured out how to do the resilience of teams yet. But we do take a balanced approach to a socio-technical system. So we think the people are really, really important, and we don't think that there's any way you can replace them, but we can augment them. We can help people do a better job more efficiently with computers. What an idea.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's important, isn't it, to bring in the human aspect when you're talking, especially something about SRE, where it's, we try to automate as much as we can, but we still need to have people and kind of empower them, really, like you're saying, right, Kurt?
Exactly. The decision making of humans is not likely to be eclipsed very soon by AI. Certainly AI can recognize cats and dogs pretty well. But as far as making the decision about what services need to have what sort of remediation taken when an incident occurs, people are just a lot more flexible than machines are. And really, the resilience in a socio-technical system doesn't come from the computer systems, it comes from the people. That's one of the core tenets in the safety science space, is that the people are what keep the system running, even when the system theoretically shouldn't be. You could think of it like the bumblebee, the aerodynamics of a bumblebee, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I guess I was thinking, as you were mentioning, the human component, and we're talking about, especially I would think with, something like SRE where there's incidents that can happen at all times. I know I was actually working on a release this last weekend early in the morning, and it's one of those things as we think about, you're kind of, today, this is, it's 4:00 here in the afternoon on the East Coast. I know it's a little earlier for you, you're in Idaho, but when it's bright and early in the morning, or maybe in the middle of the night, and you have an incident, you're not really processing on all cylinders, are you? So you really have to help people out there, don't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's, there's been various studies showing the effects of sleep deprivation and how it's more or less equivalent to fairly significant degrees of intoxication. Mm-hmm. Likewise, when you wake somebody up in the middle of the night, they're not thinking clearly, I think almost by definition. And having systems that they can easily adapt to and just respond almost by rote and only have to think a little bit really does make a big difference.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know that having those systems in place, and I think we talked a little bit about this in your session, but having kind of those principles, having procedures and things in place can really help kind of elevate people and empower them to do a better job.
Exactly. Whether it's run books and playbooks, or whether it's even just sort of a formalized dialogue pattern that people can have ingrained as sort of motor memory, muscle memory. I know it's all mental, and so there's no muscles involved except maybe when you're speaking. But it's the same concept, that it becomes almost instinctual, and you can respond out of those instincts even when you're half asleep, so to speak.
So as you mentioned, like at Blameless, you're working on a product for SREs. And as you talk about that, it makes me think, sometimes I read books on like habits and things like that. Or do you think about, I'm guessing when you're, trying to design something like that, you're thinking about, how can we make this a habit, make it easier for people and be able to respond quickly?
Definitely looking at decreasing the friction, decreasing the number of steps that have to be performed by a person when a person could say, hey, there's an incident, get this group of people together. And this group is previously defined and it's been thought through and designed by the business. And all the person has to say is get group 5 involved with this incident. And or escalate this to the database team or something like that. Making it relatively simple so they don't need to think, okay, the database team, gee, who is that? And who's on call today? And so some of this comes into sort of the paging systems, whatever people choose to use. But some of it is just, okay, an incident has happened. We know that we need these groups involved. And if one command can do to bring the whole group together to respond to the incident, then that's that much less work that somebody has to think about at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you use the word friction, and I think that's a good word to use when you think about that, Kurt. But you talked about, and I know when we were talking before in your session, but you've been in this field for a while. You did this kind of in places where they didn't even call it SRE. But talk about how, as you've kind of progressed through your career, you've seen that friction kind of be reduced, and what are some of those key important parts?
Well, there are definitely more tools available today. If I think back 10 years, tools for effectively keeping track of on-call were at best homebrew, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you couldn't go and buy an off-the-shelf solution like PagerDuty, for example. And I know there's some other competitors because some people don't like PagerDuty, but I'm just going to use that because everyone knows it's like calling Kleenex instead of facial tissue, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so the ability to have these tools, there's a lot more available now in terms of like ticket tracking, whether you want to go to something that has more structure with it, or whether you want something that gives you a ton of flexibility, or whether you just want to track it in GitHub tickets, for example. There's lots of places you can do ticketing and sort of tracking work now that didn't used to be the case. So I think a proliferation of tools and seeing different groups that use different tools. Some of them come with your IDE. Some of them will integrate with your IDE. Some of them require you to go off and do ugly workarounds. Obviously, that's an example of lots of friction. But most of the tools have recognized that they need to have these integration points, whether it's an API or they can ingest an email or something like that, that makes it a lot easier to use from wherever you're natively working. And now, of course, chatbots, I'd say in the last, I don't know, IRC was around for a long time, and a lot of people did build some things on top of IRC, but then of course Slack popularized it for a much wider audience, and chatbots in MS Teams or HipChat, if it's still even sold, or Slack, have become, everyone's used to the messaging platform, and making a chatbot that lives there that integrates with these systems just makes the work a lot easier to just deal with it from the system you're used to dealing with it in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important, to those integration points. And I know as you kind of talk through that, like I've worked as a developer for many years, and just the simple integrations make it so much easier than, okay, I'm going to do something here, and then I got to go log into something completely different and update this. Oh, and then there's this other thing that I have to do that I forgot, and somebody's pinging me about. That friction is just it drives you crazy, I think, sometimes as a developer.
Yeah, and it's task switching. I mean, in some ways, even if you're having to go look something up, Wikipedia is amazing, and it's got a ton of information out there. But to break the flow of working on your code in order to go look up something there is still a context switch, and that is a point of friction and decreases your productivity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. So I guess as we talk about like site reliability and the principles involved, and you've talked about how you've been through and been in this industry for a while, where are we, would you say, Kurt, with the maturity of SRE? Is there lots of change to come, or are we starting to see where things are? We're kind of getting a robust principles as you talked about, and or do you see a lot of change on the horizon?
I think in general that we are in between. We're somewhere in between. There's the future is here, but it's unevenly distributed.
Yeah.
To steal another phrase,
Hmm.
there are companies that have very well developed SRE practices and approaches throughout the company. They tend to be somewhat few. Um, Looking at the industry as a whole, Gartner puts SRE still climbing the hype curve.
Yeah.
It hasn't quite reached the peak yet. And I think we see that again in the amount of interest that is coming from areas that haven't previously cared about SRE. Some of it, I think, is because companies are realizing that reliability is actually quite important to their product and
Hmm.
their customer experience, which I am all in favor of. But I still think there's a lot of companies that are not fully there yet with realizing that, oh, hey, yeah, reliability is actually important. And yes, we should invest in it. So there's a lot of further adoption to come. Will the field change much? I don't know, because SRE is in some ways such a generalist,
Yeah.
taking a full systems perspective view.
Hmm.
And it's hard to imagine how that might develop. There will be new, obviously, changes in technology and changes in how systems go now that we're all in containers. That brings its own ethos and set of problems, and people have to learn how to do containers reliably.
Hmm.
There will be future changes as well when we get into functions as a service and everybody's just running on this mishmash of functions across a cloud provider. Okay, they're going to have different problems. But as far as a practice of working to establish reliability in a sustainable way, I think that is a general overarching theme that will characterize SRE going into the future.
So you mentioned like with the switch to containerization, what are some of the big, gotchas or learnings that companies have had to understand as we make that switch?
Well, I'd say just like the move from on-prem hardware to hardware that was run by somebody else
Hmm.
to virtual, or even on-prem going to virtual systems, they have different limitations, and you end up with bottlenecks and contention in different places. The ways that you measure and assess if your systems are running well and doing what they're supposed to changes just because you have different things to measure now, that you have metrics that didn't exist before. And now you need to start looking for noisy neighbor problems, potentially, depending on how your system is architected. You need to worry about quotas, whether they be hard or soft. How effectively is the machine being used? If you're doing it in AWS, are you starting to run into some random limit that AWS has not documented, or Google or Azure? I mean, they all have them,
Yeah.
and they may not know they're there. But all of a sudden, when you're trying to make 10 billion DNS queries a second, you're probably going to find a limit there somewhere.
Yeah. 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 That's the thing. It reminds me, I was talking a few years ago to someone who worked for actually an agricultural implement maker, I guess, basically tractors, if you will. And um, you wouldn't think they would have as advanced analytics as they do, but they actually had some issues with AWS. They encountered some limits. I remember because they were he was talking about all the data they were pulling in, and it was just like one of those things like, yeah, sometimes you find out the hard way, don't you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, like with IoT and the proliferation of hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of independent devices that are sitting out there on the edge,
Mm-hmm.
that is a whole nother scale of volume that we're not used to seeing. I mean, it was one thing to go from desktop computers where people had a web browser
Yeah.
to mobile phones. And now all of a sudden, every device in your house is going to be trying to talk. And you're going to try to harvest that information, try to make sense out of it. Um, but there's still a very large volume of data that has to be handled in terms of individual pieces of data.
So as you talk about that data, I'm guessing at some point, like with SRE and pretty much everything, that there's going to be some AI brought in there to help us analyze, because we're mere humans and we have to be kind of helped a little bit in that regard.
I'm not a big fan of AI. I think ML is a better description in terms of
Yeah.
machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, looking for patterns in the data flows is undoubtedly an area that machine learning can assist with.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the meaning of those patterns is not something that ML is particularly capable of, at least at this point.
Yeah.
So that's still, the system can surface issues to the humans, but then so that the humans don't maybe need to sit there with eyes on glass, which is very much an anti-pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's still up to the humans to figure out, does this mean something valuable? And what is it?
Yeah. Is it an anomaly or is it just a blip that we're, something that...
Yeah. Is it halftime at the Super Bowl? You see all kinds of interesting patterns. You can see it. There's been publications like from Twitter looking at the volume of traffic that they see in conjunction with various sporting events, whether it's the World Cup or whether it's the Super Bowl, and looking at the volume patterns they see in conjunction with those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They know what we're doing and when we're taking a break.
Exactly. Or even between sessions at the DevOps Online Summit.
There you go. That's right. So, well, Kurt, we appreciate you joining us here and thank you for your time. Do you have any closing thoughts as we wrap up our session here today?
I'm really excited about a new announcement that we're going to have coming out next week from Blameless. I'll take a moment to pitch it. We are going to be debuting our SLO product as part of our product suite. And we're going to have a webinar on Monday to kick that off. So we'd like to invite anybody who is interested to come to blameless.com, sign up for the webinar on Monday and find out more.
Excellent. I think your cohort, Christopher, kind of teased that to us the other day. He wasn't sure. Maybe some things have changed and it's been official, but it
was official earlier. He just maybe didn't want to let the cat out of the bag that early.
That might be Kurt. So anyways, appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom, for having us.
Have a good day, everyone.